Once more, I think we are running behind time, and maybe we can start now. Our colleagues that are coming in will find us along the way. Yeah, so I'm here to give the recap of yesterday's deliberations, and these are some of the key takeaways that I noted. And to start with, one prominent issue that came out was the model of prioritizing stakeholder engagement to ensure research is relevant and impactful, and further, to transform the research for relevant and equitable outcomes. Another prominent issue that came out was the FSNet Africa model, of which 80% of the FSNet Africa cohort is predominantly female. This was a deliberate effort because, as we may know, only 31% of researchers on African continent are female, and even fewer hold leadership positions. So the FSNet model aims to support these women in gaining a competitive advantage. Another key takeaway was while the focus on research that is relevant to development has gained a great deal of traction, the engagement of stakeholders as partners in the research process, as opposed to the passive recipients of research results communication, is not yet deeply entrenched in our ways of doing things. Another issue was to truly achieve development impact through research, it is critical to embed stakeholders in the research life cycle, from the conceptualization phase all the way through to the application of the results findings. While many agree with this idea in principle, operationalizing it practically presents many challenges. Another issue was when smallholder farmers have access to necessary resources, knowledge, and information, they are more likely to adopt improved farming practices and technologies, leading to increased productivity and yields. This, in turn, contributes to food security and poverty reduction. Another issue was, key issue was social inclusion helps to empower smallholder farmers, especially women and marginalized groups, by providing them with access to credits, markets, and other essential services. This helps to improve their incomes and livelihoods, which has positive impact on their overall well-being. Another key takeaway was socially inclusive agriculture systems are more resilient to shocks, such as climate change, pests, diseases, market volatility. This is because when stakeholders have access to diverse and reliable sources of income, they are better able to cope with unexpected events. Another key takeaway was it is observed that healthier partners are strongly enabled by political processes that encourage cooperation and decentralization. So also another issue that came out prominently was using a system context to establish and strengthen informal learning networks is key in improving smallholder farmer livelihoods. Then partnerships support intersectorial and innovative solutions through strengthening cross-regional learning and use of digital solutions. By promoting social inclusion and participation, agriculture systems can also help to build more inclusive and cohesive communities. This is because when farmers work together and support each other, they can achieve more and overcome common challenges. Access to data and information could be a game changer in sustainable groundwater management and fight against the impacts of climate change. Hence, one of our partner organizations, SADC GMI, has been involved in data collection and management intervention to promote data availability. This is important. Another key issue was it is important to say no to partnership that does not serve your purpose. Corporate partnerships must offer mutual benefits to all partners on board. Partnerships and collaborations are key in getting any finished product and getting increased investments. Also, that partnerships between governments is key to understand and properly manage transboundary aquifers. Groundwater has become a fundamental resource for social, economic, and environmental sustainability. Human well-being, livelihoods, ecosystem, industries, agriculture, and urban development are more and more reliant on groundwater. Therefore, it is essential to adopt climate-smart agriculture through conjunctive use of surface and groundwater resources. Partnerships and collaborations are key in getting any finished product and increased investments. And this was a prominent issue that came from the wine industry partners. There is also different partnerships are required to ensure sustainable management of water resources. We need to consider new models like the shift from top-down oriented interventions to demand-driven, and government to switch from implementing entity to an evaluation, a monitoring and evaluation entity. Another key issue that came out was that there is need to develop a legal framework for irrigation infrastructure and insurance. Some more few key takeaways were that technical fixes alone will not work, as irrigation systems are part of complex systems. Therefore, there is a need for several simultaneous interventions to overcome the challenges within small irrigation systems. Also, that non-water related factors, access to input, farm equipment, transportation, value-adding opportunities, function markets, etc., associated with increasing production and security profitability of the farm operations are prime on irrigation. Another key issue that came out was agriculture innovation platforms, AIPs, continuously guide dialogue between agriculture value chain stakeholders. Therefore, we need help in making farmers align their operations to demands of the market. Also, we need to make sure that market systems respond to opportunities and constraints faced by smallholder farmers. Also, we need to work on addressing some of the production constraints that affect viability of irrigation schemes. For example, lack of knowledge, lack of access to functional markets. So those are the few key takeaway points that I wanted to deliberate on this morning as we start the first session. Thank you very much. I'll invite Engineer Sauramba to take up for the next session.
Hello, good morning, everyone. It's good to do the other session. I know the afternoon one is called the graveyard session. I'm not sure what we call this one, but I think we are all energized and ready to do the business for the day. I am sure that we have the speakers of the day in the house. Can I call them to come and sit over here? We have Mr. Delphine Felisa, Engineer Bezo Shitsungo, Dr. Ikalafeng Kakatsi, Dr. Tukozani Smelane, Mr. Kwame Ababio, Dr. Agbon Laho. Can you please come to the front seat? I see we have 3 in the house. Maybe the other ones are coming, still on the way. Okay. So this morning we have a session that's supposed to last 90 minutes. We were supposed to start at 9, and it's indeed 4 minutes to 9, so we are on track. Let me quickly get to understand who is available. Mr. Vilisa? He is not with us. I'm not sure whether anyone is online amongst this. No? No. Engineer Bezo? Yeah, here, thank you. Dr. Kakasi? Yeah, there? Okay. Dr. Simelane? Not here. Mr. Kwame is not here. He should be joining. He should be online. Okay. Okay. So for this morning, for this session, we are supposed to session 9. We're supposed to focus on policy priorities for transitioning to climate resilient farming systems in Sub-Saharan Africa. That is the theme of this session, which I will chair. And I was going to be tough with time, but then I will have a couple of people missing, so we should be good with time. Let me then start by introducing Dr. Engineer Bezo Chitsungo. Right. Let me just get your profile here. Right. Yeah, okay. All right. Sorry, I normally operate in straight lines, so I skipped the keynote here. We obviously have a keynote speaker, Miss Stembile. I'll not try your surname just for security reasons. So she will give us a keynote presentation. She's the director of policy research and analysis. Ms. Tembi has over 12 years of transdisciplinary leadership experience in research for development program, design, research and policy analysis, policy dialogue convening and facilitation, stakeholder engagement and partnership development, specifically around agriculture, resilience, climate change, and nutrition. She currently serves as the Director of Policy Research and Analysis at FANPAN. Her work focuses on enhancing the research to policy and practice interface to help raise investment in and policy support for building resilient food systems across Africa. She manages a portfolio of programs worth over $5 million focused on creation, implementation, and assessment of food, agriculture, and natural resources policies that are both evidence-based and developed in partnership with non-state actors. So she's really the right person to be here this morning to talk to us about this topic. And we have started on the right track with gender this morning, so I'm sure you take us through this one. Whenever we woke up as we were growing, we first saw the mothers before we saw the fathers, right? So here you are. Over to you.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Let's see if... Okay. All right, so I've been introduced, so I won't do that. The reason why I'm standing here today is because I am here to present the third component of the Transforming Irrigation in Southern Africa project. We have had quite a bit about the TISA project in the last 3 days, but perhaps one of the elements that we have not had too much about is the work stream that has been looking at the policy side of things. As FunPan, our role really has been to look at what policy changes based on the agriculture innovation platforms and the simple tools that have been presented would improve livelihoods of irrigators and help smallholder irrigation schemes become more profitable and self-sustaining and environmental sustainable. So I am just going to take a few minutes to just walk you through some of the work that we have done as FANAPAN. I also have to declare upfront to say most of the leadership as far as the policy components of the TISA project are concerned was led by my colleague Njongenhle Nyoni, who has since left, and I know he was very dear to the team, and I just wanted to acknowledge the hard work that he did, especially in bringing the sort of CADEB and Malabo declarations into the whole project. So in looking at the policy elements, I think there were 3 levels that as FANAPAN we focused on. We focused at the global, the regional, and the national level. At the global level, efficient use of water for agriculture features quite heavily within the development policy frameworks. And within the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly Sustainable Development Goal 6, which looks at clean water and sanitation. The need for improving water quality, integrated water resource management, and the protection and restoration of water-related ecosystems is stressed. And further, the need for developing countries in water and sanitation-related activity programs, including water harvesting, desalination, water efficiency, wastewater treatment, recycling, and reuse technologies is highlighted in the targets for 2030. When we come to the African sort of continental level, we have Agenda 2063 goals, which sort of outline the Africa that we want. And irrigation and water management for African agriculture is closely tied to Agenda 2063. And under the African Union's Agenda 2063, communities, and again under Goal 5 on modern agriculture for increased productivity and production. So the use of water for agriculture purposes is something that is quite highlighted in some of the sort of continental frameworks. So Agenda 2063 is like the mother of sort of all frameworks at a continental level. But when it comes to sort of sector-specific policies, we have the CADEP, which is the Comprehensive African Agriculture Development Program. That was initiated by the African heads of state and has since transformed into, oh gosh, sorry. So CADEB has since transformed into the Malabo Declaration on Accelerated Agricultural Growth and Transformation for Shared Prosperity and Improved Livelihoods. In terms of in terms of the actual targets, so CADEB served as the framework for action for agriculture transformation since 2003, and it had really two key goals. The first one was the 6% average annual growth in the agricultural sector at national level. And then the second one was the allocation of at least 10% of the national budget to agriculture. So since 2003, there's been a process of trying to track to see if countries are actually allocating 10% of their budgets to agriculture, and if that is resulting in the 10% growth, that in the 6% growth that we want to see. So the process has been was launched in 2003, became sort of transformed into the Malabo Declaration in 2014. And following that sort of transformation, there has been a biannual process of reviewing progress against the Malabo Declaration indicators. So the Malabo Declaration on Accelerated Agricultural Growth and Transformation, it expresses a recommitment towards attaining the agricultural revolution in Africa. And this commitment really came about as a result of the progress or lack of progress and lessons that were learned in the earlier years of CAADP. The importance of water and irrigation is stressed under Goal 3, which is the commitment to ending hunger in Africa by 2025. This really committed African heads of state and government to efficient and effective water management systems, notably through irrigation to accelerate agricultural growth and end hunger by 2025. So we are only, 2 years till 2025? It's really a period of trying to see if we are getting there or we are not getting there. Oops. All right, so in terms of the biannual review process and the results that have been coming out. So the first one came out in 2017 and the most recent one came out last year. The biannual review process monitors and reviews progress made by member states in implementing the Malabo Declaration goals. And what we are seeing, okay, so maybe just before. So it has the 7 thematic areas that are contained within the Malabo Declaration, and it has 24 categories of performance categories, and then it has got 49 indicators, of which there's also a sort of water-related indicator that we are going to just look at later. So you see when the review process started in 2017, we had 47 countries that reported, and I think this has been improving, with last year having 51 countries reporting. So in the third biannual review report, what we are finding is that there are still quite a number of countries that are not on track to meet any of the, maybe most of the goals of the Malabo Declaration. But we also have quite a number of countries that are progressing fairly well, and we have very few countries that are on track. So there's still a lot of work to be done. If you can see from the presentation on screen, so these are sort of all the countries, and I think you can just see from the red is not on track. So you can just see there's only 2 countries that are on track, I think, that you can see that are fully green. And then you have some countries that are progressing well, and the majority of the countries overall, I mean across all the 7 sort of thematic areas of the Malabo Declaration, that are not doing very well. If we can take, for instance, the countries that the TISA project is focusing on, Mozambique, it has a score of 4.14. it's not on track. And then if we take Zimbabwe, it has a score of 5.17, which is, it's above, you know, slightly above the average, but it's getting there. Then we have Tanzania. I don't know if okay, yeah. So we've got Tanzania that's progressing well, but it has not, it's not considered on track, but it's progressing well. So with 2 years to go till the deadline on some of these targets, I think I'm not so confident that we will see all these red turning green or blue, but it certainly shows that there's still a work to be done in this regard. Okay, so this is just a summary of, in terms of how countries are doing. Okay, so we have also been able to sort of analyze the performance by region, because I think sometimes, you know, countries can help each other, you know, to achieve their national targets, and the regional economic communities do from time to time sort of facilitate processes where they bring countries together so that they can learn from each other. So as you can see that, well, throughout all the regions really, we have a lot of countries that are not doing well. Central Africa and Northern Africa, of course, performing the worst, but with Southern Africa and East Africa, with at least some countries that are on the way to achieving the targets. All right, so we have then also, sorry. Sorry, can we just move to the analysis of the TISA countries? Okay, so we have then taken the three TISA countries that we have been working on to analyze what their performance looks like. I think from the results, the BRR explicitly notes that there is need for investment in at least Zimbabwe, of course, Tanzania and Mozambique. There's also need for investment in those countries. But as you can see here, there are a number of areas where you can see the benchmark, for instance, for the first performance category is 7.92, and we have Zimbabwe at least performing close to that benchmark. But there's definitely room for Mozambique and for Tanzania as well to progress in that area. One of the areas perhaps that has been most talked about in this conference around women participation in agriculture, I think all countries are doing poorly and could improve in that area. In terms of the category performance on resilience to climate-related risk, we have Tanzania and Zimbabwe doing fairly well, and we have Mozambique lagging behind a bit. So when you then consider the TISA interventions that have been presented throughout the week, it does clearly show that the focus area of the TISA project is really relevant to what the priorities under the Malabo Declaration are. And it's areas that really we could continue doing some work on and making sure that we work with the governments so that they are able to progress in some of these performance categories. Okay, so these are some of the partners that we have been working with. I think we have heard from some of them in the last 2 days. But I wanted to then just say, from the work that we have been doing, we have also been working with other partners in the region in trying to understand what the policy barriers are and what are the sort of possible solutions and what recommendations could we put to our policymakers. I think one of the things that we had from the African Union as they were participating this week is the fact that there is need for us to push messages from projects such as TISA, from this dialogue, to be able to inform decisions that are going to be made at the African Union level. So what we find is that for countries to deliver on food security and nutrition targets under the African Union's Agenda 2063 as well as the Malabo Declaration, collective and individual action is needed at all government level, or maybe not just government level, at national level, from across all stakeholders, from government, from research, and from the private sector, and also among the farming communities. So some of the key recommendations, I've just decided to categorize them according to the sort of different actors. So for instance, for government action, what we need to see is that irrigation needs to be elevated to be a top priority. Currently, there are fewer African countries that have a dedicated ministries of water and irrigation. There are also fewer African countries where you find that the Department of Water works very well and closely with the Department of Agriculture. I think we had the call from the colleagues here in South Africa to say there is need for these different departments to work closer together and to be able to align their interests. And I think the second part is really about smart regulation. So regulating, governing the access to and use of water and land in agriculture is essential to improving the economic efficiency and environmental effectiveness of irrigation producers. I think we heard from the case of the irrigation scheme in Zimbabwe, where when that agriculture innovation platform was formed, and we had the farmers talking to the water authority, and there was an agreement on how best to use the water instead of sort of having the water opened, what was it, every weekly, yeah. Then there was an agreement of how to time that to make sure that there is no wastage of water. So in terms of private sector actions, I think we have had quite a bit from colleagues here as well on the need to rehabilitate the infrastructure, but also to not just overemphasize on the infrastructure, to make sure that all the other social elements that need to be in place are improved. And I think there's also a role for the private sector as far as deploying innovative technologies is concerned. They have a critical role to play in design and development and dissemination of innovative smart technologies for agriculture that are locally adapted and improve smallholder farmer productivity and livelihoods. Then, of course, there's need for joint action. You know, whilst there's need for government action, private sector action, and farmer action, there's need for joint action across the different stakeholders when we are looking at issues like skills development and training, when we're looking at the issue of access to finance. And I think maybe just to talk a bit about the access to finance issue. I think the acquisition of new irrigation systems equipment, perhaps maybe the equipment that was presented here during the last 2 days that is being used in the TISA project, there's need to be able to sort of help farmers to have the resources that are needed for them to be able to access. But more importantly, there is need to make sure that women and youth also get that assistance. And for that to happen, there's need really for a supportive fiscal regime where barriers to accessing finance for equipment services are removed. I think in some other areas we have heard of different approaches such as village saving and loan schemes that are helping farmers to pool their resources and for them to be able to get the necessary equipment that they need. So in closing, I think this is not an exhaustive list because, I mean, I have limited time here. But what I wanted to also then highlight is that there has been some publications that have been developed to sort of profile the policy options that should be considered as we sort of work to transition to climate-smart agriculture food systems. And these are publicly available. There's a special issue that was done by the project with a number of papers that would be of interest. And then there are also policy briefs as well that have been published that I think outline the sort of key policy options for this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tembi, that was an inspiring start to the day. I think we really got to have an insight of where we stand as a continent with those TISA countries. And interestingly, I captured one very important aspect that we are the countries, those three countries you mentioned, are lagging, especially on women empowerment. Where I come from, most of the work is done by the same women, but still we fail to empower them to be in the mainstream of things and provide for food. You also captured the way we are lagging in regards to the Marabo Declaration. I think we have a long way to go, but we don't have time. I think that's a profound conclusion you made. But then at the end, you highlighted in a few statements the need to create an enabling environment for promotion of this food security, agriculture, and irrigation in particular. Looking at the governments, how they can create an enabling environment, what instruments we need to facilitate that. So thank you so much. Let's give Tembi another round of applause for a job well done. She has gotten us very well started on this session. Let me then go to our next speaker, who is Engineer Bezo Chitsungo. Let me introduce him. He's the Director, Department of Irrigation, Ministry of Lands, Agriculture, Fisheries, Water and Rural Development, one of the longer ministries I've read. He's a seasoned agricultural engineer with over 18 years of experience in the design, construction and rehabilitation of irrigation infrastructure, technically proficient in project planning and management. He has got expertise in implementing 10 key civil, electrical and mechanical equipment installation projects, rehabilitation and plant maintenance. He has got a sound knowledge of engineering, procurement, construction, and commissioning. He is passionate about precision farming. Basil is a promoter of advanced irrigation technologies. He has a wide international exposure in pumping systems, center pivots and agricultural machines, and has expertise in conceptualizing projects and programs for resource mobilization. He's also experienced in implementing emergency national food security programs. He's motivated by the plight of the poor. Basil has been working with smallholder irrigation communities, helping them to free themselves from the bondage of poverty. He has also assisted several commercial farmers in design and installation of irrigation systems. What a choice. He's the right man to be here. So welcome, Bezo, and talk to us. Thank you.
Yes, when you were talking about my profile, I almost thought you were reading from the wrong. What humbling introductory remarks. Let me say as I salute the conveners of this dialogue. All protocols observed, with all due respect to all the players that have made this conference a huge success. I am going to be talking about strategic policy priorities for climate resilient farming systems in Sub-Saharan Africa, with a focus on Zimbabwe. Next slide. I would have preferred to be in control of. Can I? It's not working. Next slide, please. So, I think much has been talked about in terms of the importance of water resources in agriculture development, especially with a focus on irrigation. And I would like to just quickly highlight that, as we all know, that 70% of the world's freshwater resources are actually consumed in agriculture. In Zimbabwe, for example, we use almost 79% of our water resources in agriculture. And water scarcity is predicted to have negative effects on agriculture's long-term economic, growth and food security. And unfortunately, within our smallholder irrigation, subsector, we do not have mechanisms that we have put in place to actually account for how much water we are using. And therefore, if water resources are not efficiently managed, there's going to be unavoidable shortages, and predictably, conflicts around water resources are going to be a thing of the future. There could be fights around water resources. Having said this, I would like to just make you reflect on what's happening even in Egypt. The water resources issues around Egypt, Ethiopia, as far as other countries like Uganda. There is, if water resources are not well managed, really we are sitting on an issue that may, cause conflicts to unavoidably be in our midst. Next slide, please. So I'll give you the context with respect to Zimbabwe. The country is actually faced with a skewed water resources, water sector development, whereby the dam development is far ahead of the irrigation development, and the country is sitting on a potential of about 1.5 million hectares, out of which 216,000 hectares are considered as equipped with irrigation infrastructure. And as of now, 193,000 hectares of that 216,000 hectares is considered functional. And we have got about 25,000 hectares that require rehabilitation and modernization across the farming sectors. And the country actually needs about next slide please, about 350,000 hectares for it to be food self-sufficient. The government has come up with a national development strategy, which we have coined National Development Strategy number 1, which is covering the period 2021 to 2025, where we have a target in irrigation of accelerating irrigation development to 350,000 hectares by 2025. And within the NDS1, we have the National Accelerated Irrigation Rehabilitation and Development Program, which is anchored by the Agricultural and Food Systems Transformation Strategy, which have laid the groundwork for accelerating irrigation development, with the main objective of strengthening resilience of agricultural, livelihoods, and graduating our smallholder farmers, especially from pro-subsistence to farming as a business, and also contributing to the national and regional food security situation. Next slide, please. So to address and to accelerate irrigation development, the country is continuously investing in water resources development. At the moment, we have got at least 10 active dam sites that are under construction, of which the same dams, when completed, will be having a potential of about 81,000 hectares that could potentially be put under irrigation. And over and above that, we have got a program to explore the untapped groundwater resources, whereby we are on a drive to make sure that there are bores in every village. I'm sure, as highlighted earlier by my colleague who presented earlier, the country has 8 rural districts, which are made up of 62 districts in total, out of which we have got 35,000 villages. And the intention around this program is to make sure that every village has got access to at least a prolific bore that is able to supply potable water for human consumption. Over and above that, tied to what we are calling nutrition gardens, which are in extent at least a hectare in every village. And over and above that, an aggressive fisheries development program has been put in place, whereby we are going to be having fish ponds also in every village, with support from government, where fish fingerlings are being given to the farmers as seed to promote the development of fisheries. Over and above that, there are ongoing consultations around the development of soil, conservation, policy, so that we can enhance protection of our water bodies. And on the same note, we are continuously maintaining our presence in terms of ensuring that the 13 to 15,000 hectares that our 450 communal irrigation schemes are sitting on are continuously operationalized and are always being maintained. And over and above that, within the smallholder fraternity, there is what we are calling the 200 hectare per district program, whereby we are developing in every district at least 200 hectares of a project every year. And this is contributing, intendedly contributing at least 12,000 hectares of smallholder irrigation schemes as a contribution to the 350,000 hectares that the country seeks to achieve by 2025. On the other hand, I think this renewed effort and commitment by government to continue to invest in irrigation development, we are alive to the reality that there's been a cycle of, build neglect, rehabilitate neglect, which has made us continuously focus on how best we can actually transform the livelihoods and sustainability of smallholder, irrigation schemes. And we are alive to the observations even by the World Bank in 2008, which actually said there has hardly been any successful and sustainable farmer-managed, smallholder irrigation scheme, despite efforts by, all partners, governments, NGOs, and private organizations. And therefore, improving policy and regulatory environment to motivate the private sector participation in towards accelerating, irrigation development and dam construction is a thing that we have actually embraced in our programming. And we have started what we are calling an irrigation development alliance, where we are crowding in the participation of private sector players in irrigation development towards mobilizing funding and operational support to make sure that the 350,000 hectares that we are envisaging to develop are sustainably going to be managed. And this is embedded by some kind of a high-frequency monitoring, initiative that has been embedded in government programming, whereby there's continuous missions that are actually checking on what's happening on our program, on our government programs on a very frequent basis. Next slide, please. I will, in my last remarks, focus on policy recommendations that we think that we need to embrace if we are to transform the smallholder irrigation development fraternity and the irrigation, sector in as a whole. There is need for us to have a paradigm shift to transition the smallholder farmers from pro-subsistence to pro-business. And having said that, we need to have a conversation around sustainable models for irrigation development. That is, we need to learn lessons from what we have been doing. Are we doing enough? And what new thing are we doing towards transitioning the same smallholder irrigation from pro-subsistence to pro-business? And having said that, we also need to have a conversation around the institutions. I think there has been a lot of institutions, not only in Zimbabwe alone, but across even the African continent. We've got many institutions that are having some mandates around irrigation development, but there's lack of clarity around the stakeholders. Therefore, there is need for governments and partners to embrace what we are calling the whole of government approach, whereby all stakeholders are being brought together to jointly program and check on each other in terms of what exactly they are doing in the irrigation sector, so that we can stretch the resources that are available for meaningful progress. And then there is also need to have a conversation around the continuous professional development of young professionals. I'm sure we all agree that the future is young. It is in the hands of the young people. As I say this, I am reflecting on what was happening even in our own country in Zimbabwe, whereby when I look at my past principal, the late Dr. Zawe, may his dear soul, rest in peace, we had a professional experience gap of 20 years. And we worked together for a good 18 years. So there has been a lot of continuous, backstopping that was happening, considering that there was that kind of an experience gap. So it was like being handheld. So there is that need within the African countries for us to consider that, experience gap and try as much as possible to continuously build the young professionals so that the sector will not experience a gap when the professional expertise is much needed as we age. And then there is also need to continuously look at farmer training and evaluate whatever we are doing with the farmers, whether the intended purposes of our training are actually yielding the results that we so expect with respect to operation and maintenance, and also with respect to water management issues. And then there is also need to have a conversation around the stakeholder lobbying, whereby in Zimbabwe we have what we call the irrigation working group, where we are pulling in all partners, the donor community, the private sector, and the government agencies to discuss ways of collaborating with an effort of trying to eliminate duplication of effort and resources. It is very important that we continuously engage with stakeholders so that at least government is also in the check in terms of what's happening in the various communities with the same intended objectives of actually improving the livelihoods of rural communities. And over and above that, there is need for paying attention to early warning systems with an effort of trying to make sure that there is support given to protect infrastructure. I was having a conversation with my colleague from Mozambique when they were talking about what happened recently as a result of Cyclone Freddy, the damage. He was talking to me about a scheme where they invested $5 million in the construction of a new irrigation scheme. And just before they would officially commission the same scheme, there is really nothing to show because of the menace as a result of Cyclone Freddy. So there is need for us to see what we can do with early warning systems, design for protection of infrastructure and also protection of livelihoods. And also there is need for a policy discussion around the promotion of the Internet of Things, the use of ICTs and smart technologies, especially with respect to management of soil, water, and nutrients. And I am very excited about the ongoing conversation around the tools that the TISA programming and the VIA have been promoting over the past 5 to 8 years. And having said that, there is need for countries to actually review the models, relaunch and roll out, so that we can actually be embracing something new, to try something new for a change, so that at least the efforts that are being put in terms of infrastructure development can be brought to fruition. In Zimbabwe, what we have done in the smallholder category of farmers around the relaunch rollout, we have what we have coined the V30 accelerator model, whereby we have roped in one of our state enterprises called the Agricultural and Rural Authority, which has got about 21 large-scale estates dotted around the country, and they are sitting on about 23,000 hectares of land with irrigation infrastructure. We have roped them in to support all smallholder farmers with what we are calling the scheme business development managers, or the scheme farm managers, who are a new layer of management on top of the irrigation management committees, who are coming in to support the activities of the smallholder farmers, where there are opportunities for consolidation. They are actually consolidating the same land, and the farmers are coming in as to contribute with services of labor on a paid ticket, and at the end of the growing season, they will get their dividend that accrues after costs have been deducted from their enterprises. Largely, in conclusion, there is need for us to promote labor, water, and energy-saving technologies, so that at least we are alive to the reality that is the climate is changing, water resources are becoming more and more scarce. We are actually maximizing on whatever is available. And also they need to promote the use of solar technology in agriculture and irrigation in particular. Next slide, please. Lastly, I would like to reflect on what we are doing, not necessarily in the irrigation fraternity, but in the area of soil and water conservation, or conservation agriculture as you loosely know it, where the government is, since 2021, started to promote what we are calling the Fumvudza Intwasa program, where households are expected to actually dig holes on very small plots, almost 600 square meters of plots, and they are supported with the adequate inputs to support the production of grain under rain-fed conditions on those plots. And the net effect or net impact of this programming is that it has been, over the years, our yields in the smallholder dryland, communal farming has been around 0.9 to 1.3 tons per hectare. But that, through this intervention, is made us realize yield increase of about 5.5 to 6 tons per hectare. So it's a high impact, program that we are saying, with what we have today, what can we do while we are mobilizing resources to actually come in with the proper irrigation infrastructure development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Engineer Chisungo, for that insightful presentation. I picked a few very interesting points from there. I'm sure we'll elaborate more on those when we go into the discussions. To chase up on the time, now we go to Dr. Gagatsi. Let me read an introduction. He's the Director for Climate Change and Disaster Risk Reduction, the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development of South Africa. Dr. Gagatsi specializes in meteorology, climate change and disaster risk management. He holds a PhD in environment from the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa, a master's degree in meteorology from the University of Wits in South Africa, and a BSc in meteorology from University of Pretoria, South Africa. He is currently responsible for climate change and disaster risk management in the Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries. He also occupied different technical and managerial positions in the former South African Weather Bureau, including weather and seasonal climate forecasts. He is a member of the risk reduction and climate change teams in South Africa. He recently published a paper in the International Journal of Disaster Risk Reduction, the contribution of seasonal climate forecasts to the management of agriculture disaster risk in South Africa. So we have got the privilege to listen to someone who has seen it all in his area and would like to tap on that. Over to you, Dr. Kakasi. I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
Thanks, Chairperson. If you did, I was going to give you something, but you're doing this Kakasi. But anyway, thanks, Chairperson, and good morning, colleagues. My name is Ikalafeng Kakasi, as he said, from the Department of Agriculture, Land Development and Rural Development. A couple of years ago, we were Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries. We'll see my document. I'll be talking about those three, but because the document I'll be presenting, we did develop it during that time. But as you look at it, overview of climate smart agriculture in 2015 or 16, when this weight was being said throughout the world, climate smart agriculture, I know when we were drafting this, someone was saying, is this conservation agriculture now being a cosmetic weight being put into? But we said it might be similar. Maybe if someone can support us when we are using this weight, maybe let's take it and make sure that we drive it. Maybe government might start maybe finding a good way of supporting farmers when we are using this climate smart agriculture responses. What we did in 2015, we assembled the colleagues and discuss following our plans on climate change and thinking that this climate smart agriculture might be the way for us to take it. Next slide. We went around and have a team and look at what might be the issue. As I said, we see now this is agricultural, forestry and fisheries. In 2018, by that time, we were not yet divorced the other two sectors, but now we are married to land reform and rural development. We discussed with the province when we were developing this document, national stakeholders internally, unions, farmer organizations, as well as international community like FANAPAN and UN Women, FAO, when we started developing this document. Next slide. This is the formation of the framework that we thought it looked like those issues that we have outlined. We look at the agreements that internationally, globally are discussed on climate change, and also look at internally at our climate smart policy framework, and as well as the policy being driven by environmental affairs, our focal point on climate change. And this is how we really finally come up with this climate smart agriculture framework. Next slide. When we are formulating it, we first look into different sectors. Agriculture have a team that went deeper, tried to really analyze the sector, as well as forestry and fisheries. Before, from that, we had a team down, then we will take it and try to consolidate and see exactly what are the issues that the government need to drive. Next slide. This the way we thought we are defining the mainstreaming of the CSA. That is informed by these three sectors to make sure that we get all the concerns regarding the climate smart agriculture, especially when we need to achieve the good practices that we can be undertaken. And this is how we thought look at all the sectors must look at their decision makings, policies and laws, institutional technologies, standards, planning framework and actions. And we thought this, as it is, all the other ways being typed there, that it can be the mainstreaming of the definition of climate smart agriculture. Next slide. These are the principle that we thought we can drive it. I know this slide you see doesn't have a background because we were unable to see exactly what, if you can read it. But I also have it on here because it was not easy. But the things that we thought are really relevant there was, the first one was leadership. We thought we need a good leadership to make sure that the climate smart agriculture can be really effectively be implemented throughout the country. The next one, we thought we need to make sure that everything is integrated within the sector, that the approaches that we considered, it's not supposed to be isolated, it needs to be integrated through from national down to local level, that's into the farming community, to make sure that they understand exactly what is our focus. The other one is we need to develop relevant programs that we think those are programs that can assist to make sure that the policy as have been developed will be easily implement them. The other one was a dialogue, like we are here today. We thought the dialogue should be the main principle that we need to be considered. One of the things that we did when we finalized this document, we also have this thinking of having dialogue throughout the country. Just before the COVID, we had national dialogue, and we had planned to do the provincial dialogue and make sure that we even take it to a lower level. And we thought those dialogue can assist us in making sure that we did a good job. We thought another thing is the ownership, that all of us must own this climate smart agriculture, national level, government, as well as private sector, anyone who really involved in the sector of farming, as well as the farmers themselves. They must own this approaches to make sure that we get it right. Yeah, the other ones I might not be able to read, but the main one which I think that might be picked up is the sustainability, that even if what we are doing, we must make sure that at least we succeed, and those things are sustainable. So these are some of the ways they've been said throughout the 2 days we had the meeting. Next slide. Next one is the same thing. Yes, these are the points and drivers that we think need to be considered within the climate smart agriculture. That time, as I said, there were those three sectors. At the moment, we are only agriculture, but we are also married to rural development. Those are the temporal scales that we think the drivers need to be mainstreamed: geographic scale, institutional scale, and the finances. And this is the main one, that we might be having a really nice document being done, and because of the finances and implementation will be failing. I know that's exactly what was discussed, that we are having nice documents, but implementation sometimes fails. But we thought we need that financial muscles, either locally or even internationally. You can tap on it. Even the document itself allow anyone, agencies who want to look for funding, they can use the document to make sure that they are implemented effectively. Next slide. These are the key outputs that are found within the climate smart framework. There are 7 of them. I know it's not going to be easy for you to read them. Initially when we had the slides, I was able to see it, but immediately when I put the background, then it mess up, it make it so small that you cannot read it. But let's go next slide, because then I will be unpacking them. Yes, this is the first one, an enabling and coordinated policy environment. I'm sure the colleagues have been heard of this that we're discussing, that even if we have this, we need an enabling environment that this policy will be thriving. Government must make sure that there is everything that can be done, and we can only be succeed if the environment are there and the finances are part of it. Next slide. The other one is a strong climate smart agriculture. I look at the 3 sectors. They need to be coordinated, capacitated, institutionalized, and as well as partnership. And these are the things also that we've been discussing. That we need to make sure that whatever we are doing, we are working as a team, coordinated, and make sure that the team that is really implementing, they are fully capacitated, and we have a good a partnership that can assist us in making sure that we are effectively implementing the climate smart agriculture. Next slide. This is the third one: increase investment in research and expanded climate smart knowledge based. This is a thing that we thought continuously you need to make sure that you strengthen your research component. There are new developments that are coming, and we think you need to come on board and make sure that if there are new approaches that are being carried out, as well as climate smart knowledge base, you need to not take it at national or a sector level. It's going to go down to the farming community, and even small-scale farming community need to be aware of this technology that you are driving. Next slide. A resource efficiency and resilient value chain based on technology innovation. This has also been discussed throughout, that we need to make sure that we really be innovative in regarding the technology and make sure that this is being taken throughout the value chain. If our climate smart agriculture is being considered from the production until you get the product to be consumed by consumers or even take it out. So this is the resource efficiency that need to be really considered throughout the policy implementation. Next slide. This repetition. Go to the next slide. Yeah, this that's number 6. And then we say climate smart. Main thing should be communication, because if you don't communicate, this might be the challenge. You know, a couple of years ago, when we were doing some of the policies, we had scientists in our midst, and they were saying, what we are talking about, we have researched it a long time ago. But the question was, where is that document? This was lying in the cupboard of the expert, but it was not really being taken through to policymakers and for implementation. And this is why we think that whatever we are doing, that we must make sure that we really effectively communicate it, and also make sure that we build a strong awareness to make sure that this strategy is being being understood throughout the implementation, and make sure that we build consensus throughout, that we all agree that this climate smart agriculture will be really a tool that all of us we can need. Next slide. Now this is the last one, a diverse funding base that will support climate smart resilience investment program. The only thing for us to succeed will be funding. I know in those years, 2018, that we said we are now in a couple of years into the 10 years that we have planned to set we might review it in 2028. The main thing will be funding, that we need really fully support by the government to make sure that we agree. The only thing that we always fight is how are you going to move away from your normal work and thinking that will take out climate smart agriculture. So you will need more funding to address those issues. Next slide. CSA incentivize and driven climate smart. I thought I talked about it to say it might not be easy for you to allow your farmers to move away from the things they've been driving for years and benefiting from it. So we need to try to think of how can we incentivize them. In the past, there was this policies that people must save their resources, natural resources, and found a way of incentivize them if they are protecting their resources, and make a carrot stick so that they might grab it. So this is the thing that we thought, especially when you look at the smallholder farmers or subsistence farming, that it might not be easy for them maybe to go through this program. But we are thinking that if we have this program that might incentivize them, that might be a better way of making sure that they buy into the climate smart approaches. Next slide. This is how we think that the framework will be effectively coordinated. We need think that we need to have a strong national steering committee at national, and we think that need to be cascaded down to the local community and make sure that this is really effectively implemented. Next slide. The main thing, again, that's to make sure that we succeed is then the M&E, monitoring and evaluation. Within the document here, we've outlined that emphasis should be also on the M&E, so that we can really check our progress in the years that we have implementing it, or whatever programs or actions being undertaken, how effective are they? So the M&E is also a cornerstone that need to be considered within the program. Next slide. I've just grappled that this will be the driving team within the implementation of this climate smart agriculture. We thought we need the 3 spheres of government here in South Africa, national, provinces and local level. Then they need to be fully part of this implementation. I thought we have the NGOs. Sometimes it's not easy to have access to the small-scale farmers or farming community, but we can use the expertise of the NGOs to assist us in making sure that we get it right. Farm organizations, they can be also our mouthpiece, that their farming communities are part of the Climate Smart family. Development partners, I thought they need to be part of that to make sure that wherever we are going, they need to be there, not be left out. Research and academic institutions, they are fully behind. They need to be considered as we will be needing any new innovations coming in, so they need to be part of it and assist us wherever there are any new improvement that need to be considered. International organizations, yes, like Fanapan, when we were building this, FAO colleagues, they were part of this, and we think that they're not supposed to be left out. Like this dialogue, when we have to look at the reviewing of the document as a living document, we'll also consider the outputs of this meeting to make sure that it's being factored into our policy. Not leaving out the private sector, that whatever we need to be winning, we need to have them as part of us to make sure that we are winning. Chairperson, I'm sure that's my last slide, and that, yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kakatsi. I think I got it almost right now. Thank you very much for that insightful presentation, to give us a different perspective of how we can create a better environment for implementation of the climate smart agriculture systems. Without wasting more time, let's go to the next presentation that will be given by Dr. Thokozani Smelani, who is a research director at ISA. He holds a PhD from Nelson Mandela Metropolitan University, and he is finalizing his second doctorate in industrial engineering through the Durban University of Technology. He has been recently listed in Marquis, Who is Who, in Science and Engineering 2011-2012. He is a member of South Africa's Standing Advisory Committee on Intellectual Property Rights, where he serves as member of the Patent Subcommittee. His research interests are in complex system analysis, biodiversity, environmental management, science and technology, industrial engineering, intellectual property, development and management, renewable energy, and standardization. Dr. Simalani, over to you, sir. Thank you.
Program Director, and greetings to everybody. I never expected that I will be introduced in this way, but just to confirm some of the things, yes, I'm done with my second doctorate, so at least now I feel I'm a little bit unique. Having said that, colleagues, we were advised that we need just to have 5 slides to present our case or to express our opinion. I've done exactly the same. My slides are 5, not more than that. And when I look at the title under which we have to make this input or bring in this perspective, it clearly says roundtable presentation, priorities and opportunities. So if I would have been given a chance to summarize what I intend to say, I would have said from my side, the priorities should be given at a household level when it comes to ensuring that the families and the household are smart enough to deal with the uncertainties that are being brought by climate change. Opportunities, of course, is that when we strengthen the household/families, they will be capable and able to produce sufficient food within the uncertainty of climate change. That's the reason why my presentation is titled Balancing the Land, please go back, Balancing the Land and technological efficiency to achieve food security in the face of uncertainty from the climate change. This and what I'll be sharing with you, colleagues, comes from the survey which the Human Sciences Research Council was requested to conduct in South Africa, so as to bring forward an understanding of the status of food insecurity at a household level here in South Africa. So I'll be sharing my perspective deriving from what we have observed. Surely, if probably I would have to present the entire study, it would have been very, very, very long, because in this study, which is first of its kind, we were evaluating the status of food insecurity at a household level using closer to 100 indicators of food security and nutrition. It was a very long study. So we have to train and recruit the data collectors. So that photo come from one of the training sessions. The data collectors that we recruited were closer to 500 across the country. So it's a very large study. This is the logo of the survey. So the first thing that came to the fore, second slide please, is that, second slide please. When you talk of food and whatever thing that we are doing from the systems perspective, there is no pointer I would be showing there, is that we are trying actually to strike a balance or an equilibrium between food production and food consumption. And bringing that together, you are talking of food security. So this is exactly what we are doing. Whether you are bringing the interpretation and the perspective from the meteorological point of view, from investigating the fertility of soil, and various other elements that you would be doing. But at the end of the day, we want to strike a balance or create an equilibrium between consumption and production. So these two, there are a number of factors that determine the effect of the entire equilibrium. Consumption on the other side, that side, is primarily from the household. And the households are of a particular characteristics in terms of the numbers of the individuals and the income in that particular household and where that income comes from. So we brought that together with an intention to make sure at least that in South Africa we develop the profiles of the household who are consuming food that are produced through a fertile land, of course. Now the question was, are the household also participating in ensuring that they produce food? The story is coming. Because for the household to be able to produce food, land is a primary factor. Primary factor in the sense that the policies of the government must encourage people to own land and have land. Then once they have that, and then what happened is that there are quite a number of secondary ingredients that have to be brought into the household for them to convert land into a productive entity that will help them then to participate into the entire food production or food security of the nation. So I can go on and on and on explaining that causal loop diagram which we have developed. It's not a model yet, but it's just a causal loop diagram that assists any policymaker to strike a balance between what they intend to do and what is expected to be done with an intention to encourage the household to be food secure. Now, we know that under a variety of uncertainties, which in most cases become strengthened by the climate change, government must come in through some programs to cushion the household from the exposure to food insecurity. From the South African perspective, there are closer to 120 programs that deal with that. And also there are quite a number of other programs that are intended to assist the household to be able to participate in the food production. The question then that we have to analyze or answer was, are those interventions efficient enough to make sure that the household participate effectively in the production of food? Next slide, please. Having said that, we came into observations that, of course, there are quite a number of technological trends that are happening, that are bringing in the buzzwords, of which some of them, there are people who are talking about eco-efficient agricultural practices, and this eco-efficiency is the practice of increasing agricultural output while using less land, water, nutrients, energy, labor, etc., etc. Some other authors, they talk about precision farming, which promotes the utilization of land and water resources effectively, and also all the way down to the nanotechnologies and the utilization of radiation for pipelines and so on. Here, the critical question is how many of these are on the hands of household owners? 0. Now, when we look at intervention from the technological perspective, that's the reason why I'm emphasizing the fact that we need to look and develop the mechanisms of a household having access to these technologies that are being developed. Because from the commercial sector, they have it, they can afford it, but households are struggling. Let us not give household monies to buy implements to tilt the land that is not productive. Let us think smart ourselves to make sure that we acquire the technologies which we can make available to household for the purpose of strengthening them to develop food or to produce food. Next slide, please. Having said that, now, the critical deductions that we made from the survey that I'm talking about is that South Africa has a dual system of land rights, which defines access to land in South Africa. This includes a constitutionally protected status law, largely patrilineal, a tribal tradition, and custom-based customary law. So according to the National Food and Nutrition Survey, every household in South Africa's 9 provinces owns the land on which it is located. That was a very interesting finding. The household, the land they own. But the average size of land possibly owned by a household is 500 square meters. This is more clearer in urban areas. And the maximum size is typically 1,000 square meters. You'll find this mostly in rural areas. So in a sizable proportion of households, they reside in rented or public property. This may be either private or government land. So the amount of land that can be used for agricultural production in each household, as per the findings of the study, is that it is non-existent because of the small proportion of land owned by the household. Very interesting finding. So it means that most households in South Africa in particular are not actively participating in food production, particularly in urban areas. Rural areas, they have a big land, but as I said, they are facing these challenges of climate change. And also the production capacity or interest in agriculture has declined drastically in South Africa. All of these things requires some intervention in assisting those who still have interest in producing food to produce it efficiently within the uncertainties of the climate change. Next slide, please. No, not many households in South Africa's 9 provinces cultivate their own land for food or other purposes. Consequently, the land that households are considered to possess is mostly used for residential purposes. Livestock production, we find that is a popular agricultural practice in many provinces compared to the production of other commodities such as maize. Livestock production seems to occur at significantly small scale though. In addition, livestock rearing like poultry farming is popular agricultural activity that occurs at a modest scale in households throughout the provinces. Crop output is always supplemented by vegetables, potatoes, and legumes that are grown at subsistence level. Next slide, please. Now, with these highlights, it can be concluded that the state of food security in any country needs to be assessed in the context of the existing land and the technological interventions that are within the household reach. I'm sorry to upset you, but my intention was to trigger your thought so that you can leave here with something in mind. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that energetic presentation. I enjoyed it. We did, right? Yeah, let's give him another hand of applause, yeah? Yes. It helps with our, there's something that they call praying for the presenter. So I know it's still the morning session, but sometimes there are some who had very long nights and they start to pray for the presenter quite early in the morning. So on this occasion, there was no possibility. Let me get to the next presentation. We are probably running a bit late, but I think it's worth all the time. The last presentation of this session is coming from Mr. Kwame Ababio. You forgive me if I don't pronounce your name correctly. He is the Senior Program Officer for Environment and Climate Change at the African Union Development Agency, that's AUDA, NEPAD. And his focus is on climate policy, diplomacy, and security. Mr. Ababio will present from is virtual. Can you please let him through and present? Thank you. I see the slides are on. Are you?
Great.
Okay.
Good afternoon. My apologies. I'm not being able to join you physically. I had other engagement, so I couldn't be with you. But it's been a very, very good session, and it takes me into the presentations, particularly the immediate past one, focusing on the household level, which I think is a very, very important policy priority area if you are to transition into effective climate resilience fund. In the interest of time, I think I have 4 slides, so I'll do justice to that and try to fit that within the 10 minutes allocation. Okay. So I'll begin by looking at the continental level and also within communities on the status quo on African agriculture and climate change. I mean, the evidence is irrefutable that there is a very clear impact on climate change and livelihoods as well as development. We have seen the recent impact of Mr. Freddy on Malawi and also in the other countries within the sub-region. It's been very, very dramatic and really plunging livelihoods into the lowest of lows. And this is really a clear and present situation within many communities on the continent, where we realize that the consequences of extreme weather is having significant impact on the productivity, as well as the entire food system value chain. And for us to be able to meet all of these targets that we've set for ourselves, both at the continental, national, and community levels, certain policy decisions are needed, a clear pathway to be able to overcome many of these challenges are needed. So there are quite a number of commitments that we can look at, but I will try to just zoom on to 6. But also highlight the importance of the continental framing. Sitembile in the earlier presentation had mentioned a number of continental and regional policies, including the CADEP, and then also in 2014 we have the Malabo Declaration on Accelerated Growth and Transformation for Shared Prosperity and Improved Livelihoods. Target 6 or Goal 6, or if you want, the Principle 6 of that Malabo Declaration really focuses on climate resilient economies, which advocates that by 2025, which is less than 2 years from now, we should have 30% of African families being resilient to climate shocks, especially within the agricultural sector. So the work is clearly cut out for us to be able to do so. But to be able to meet these targets, we need clear policy transitions and frameworks around climate change, agriculture, and the entire food systems processes. And this is key for us to be able to adopt and transform African agriculture. So I would now zoom in on the policy priorities that, for me, I think we need to really expend our energies on, ensure that once this happens, we are on the fast track to ensuring that communities, countries adopt climate smart agricultural practices. I mean, if you look at the nationally determined contributions of many African countries, at the last count, I think there was about 25 countries that specifically mentioned climate smart agriculture in their NDCs. So the African countries are clear about this, the importance of CSA in national planning processes. So for us to be able to have an effective transition, I think we have to look at the global to local policy engagements. How do we ensure that all of these lofty promises, commitments that are made at the international level are translated and domesticated in countries? We need to have a certain synergy among the multiple policy objectives and priorities, especially ministerial coordination, intergovernment departmental coordination. All of these are very, very important elements. So, for instance, climate smart agriculture should not be sitting just within either the Ministry of Agriculture or the Ministry of Environment. We need to have a certain nexus within all government ministries, departments, and agencies, as well as other actors, primarily smallholder farmers. These are the biggest investors in African agriculture. Most of the time, they are relegated to the background. But if you aggregate all the expenses that is put into agriculture, there is no doubt about it that small-scale farmers are the biggest investors in agriculture. So there needs to be a clear transition in terms of domesticating most of these global policies into national frameworks. And then the second policy priority that I would want to speak to is about supporting CSA policy frameworks and actors. So within that, we have a number of strategies at both continental and national level. The number of green, blue economy strategies, national agricultural investment plans, and all. How do we ensure that these are welded or merged into sync and into a way that's able to get stakeholder buy-in for implementation? Because implementation really happens on the ground. Local actors should not be left out of all of this. There's the LTS, the NDCs. How do we ensure that it does not stay at the top, but it's really rather a bottom-up kind of movement where most of these things come from the grassroots to enforce policy making at the top. So for us to be able to effectively transition into efficient climate resilient farming, a number of actors, principally local farmers and other people who are on the ground, need to be involved in all of this. And then also the issue of mainstreaming climate smart agriculture into policies. For instance, the NDCs should not be seen as standalone policy instruments. They should be seen as part of the wider economy focus arrangement, in that it helps them to integrate CSAs into the NDCs, which are then embedded into development plans at all levels. So we're looking at development plans at both national, provincial, as well as local levels. This needs to happen, and then sufficient budgeting needs to be made available for this as well. The other point I would want to speak to has to do with strengthening institutional coordination. It is important that we equip national and regional institution structures and processes with the right financial and technical tools needed to enhance cross-sectoral coordination and collaboration. We've had a situation where there is very little resource that goes to local actors. There was a study that I continuously refer to as a study done by the International Institute of Environment and Development, which was carried out between 2003 and 2016. And the outcome of that study was that between that period, less than 10% of all funds earmarked for local actors actually reach them. And this is really related to climate finance. Less than 10% of it go to the local actors. So for us to transition into effective farming systems, we need to unblock this barrier to make sure that the needed resources reach the intended targets, who are the local farmers, the local fishermen, the local artisans, who are really responsible for productivity on the ground. And then also the issue of inclusive governance. I think this is very, very important. It's already been mentioned in one of the presentations. How do we ensure that in terms of policy making, it emanates from the bottom, where specific needs of interest of key stakeholder groups are identified, and then also tangible entry points for many of these actors are taken into consideration. And last but not the least, and perhaps one of the more important factors that need to be considered, is leadership and political will. I think in the last but one presentation, the speaker mentioned the issue of leadership and political will. And for me, political will is not just an issue of going to a summit of the heads of states and governments and making a pronouncement. I think it needs to go beyond that. We need to put our money where our mouth is. CADEP advocates for 10% of annual budget to agriculture. That is political will. If countries are able to do that, that signifies political will. So it's not just about adopting the resolutions and the decisions, but we need to back many of these decisions with the needed financial, technical, and other resources to make it happen. And of course, the role of CSA policy champions and focal points is also very, very important. But for them to be able to function actively and bring on board a wide range of groundswell of support for CSA-related interventions, they need to be capacitated, they need to be supported, they need to have a platform from which they can operate. So for me, I think these are very, very important elements that we would have to consider if we want to transition with the right policy environment to have an effective farming resilient, climate resilient farming system. That said, I thank you for the opportunity to speak. And in the interest of time, there are quite a number of policy priorities that we could have gone into, but I just limited myself to those things, which I think are very, very important and should be looked at by African government institutions and development partners as well, if we are to support African agriculture to grow efficiently. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that presentation. You raised one point in your last slide, political will, as one of the building blocks to succeeding in this area of CSA. Thank you so much. I think we have hit 10:30 on the dot, but I know where we are going after this. We are going for tea, right? And most of us can take tea very fast, so we can take some 15 minutes or so to ask questions and interrogate these brilliant presenters that have done a good job for us. I see 4 hands. Let me start. Oh my God, 5. Okay, I'll start right at the top there. Ladies first. The lady right at the top. You want to use this one? Is this one okay? I'll start right at the top there, the lady there, and then there, and then I come here, sir. Then we come here, and then there. So we have 5. Okay, this corner, we'll just wait a bit. I've raised the first 5, right? Okay, let's start from right up there. Let's ask only the difficult ones, right? Yes, right there. Thank you. Please go.
I like the discussion on this policy framework. From my experience, it seems that we do not lack good policies, but the challenge is implementation of translating these policies into practice. For instance, the first presenter talked about the regional framework, especially the CADAP and the Marabo Declaration. To what extent do we translate this at a household level, drawing from what the other presenter who emphasized the role of the household?
Okay, let's take note. I think that's yours, Tembi. Yeah, just take note of that question. Let's pick the lady right up there. We are starting with ladies today. Yeah.
Is it on? I would like to make about 3-4 comments. Good morning, everyone. I'm called Beatrice Egulu, and I work for the African Union Commission. First, I would like to commend all the speakers, and in particular to congratulate FANAP for presenting work that has been done by the Commission, and she did it very well. I have heard her comments on whether we are progressing or we are not progressing. And then I saw her recommendations, and I agree with all the recommendations. But I would like us to look at those recommendations in the context of how do we do it. They are all correct and they are all very good. At continental level, when our heads of state and government sit in Addis Ababa and Ethiopia and they start making decisions on behalf of sovereign states, and then there's no clear maybe buy-in from the implementers who are the member states, and many of them are seated here. For example, if 16 countries or 16 countries of SADC or 17 countries of ECOWAS were to buy into one decision and implement it fully, you can see what difference it would make. And if we have small initiatives that would want to support particular commitments like TISA, we would like to hear a story of TISA saying these are the lessons that have been learned, and that is the difference that we have made in the countries that we are working. If you say that you've worked in Mozambique and you've worked in another XYZ country, and tell a story in a policy brief, for example, of saying the intervention that was made has made a difference, and that's why our countries are standing apart. That would make other member states learn from your experience. This is what we call peer-to-peer learning. And recently we went to Rwanda to say, how do you make it? How do you make sure that all the time you are on top? Is it political winning? Is there massaging of the data? So people wanted to understand, because countries report for themselves. Anyone can say anything. But countries went there and listened in, and they saw how everything is organized in the country, and the commitment from the president himself. They have, anyone from Rwanda here, they have a way, they set the KPIs, and the president himself can come to your office when you are not aware. At 7 o'clock, he's on your desk, and he sees what time you are coming. And at the end of the year, they give marks. If you don't get 80%, then you don't get the 13th month. You know, that kind of incentive. So we would like this room, with all the stories you've taken, please write small policy briefs to inform the changes that can can be made per recommendation that has been made by FANAPAN. I would like the last slides of the doctor in green, the one who spoke about the climate change strategy, the climate smart agriculture strategy of the country here. We should look at those slides very carefully. They are very, very important slides. They are at country level, but scale them up to SADC level, scale them up to continental level, and put all the issues at that level. If we could have that framework, I'm telling you, what he has presented here will make a big difference. And in fact, you saw when Auda presented, he also spoke to those slides. For me, I think one key outcome of this meeting should be working on the slides, the last slides of the South African presenter, to see how we can put that to scale. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Yes, okay. I think let's make it a bit shorter, right? Thank you so much, so that we also give the others a chance. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, and thanks for all the presenter. I see for the keynote, there is one important recommendation about investment in irrigation structure. And also we heard from Engineer Basil about the irrigation development in Zimbabwe, and I appreciate too much the great efforts. But I see there is, we miss an important smart system which could enable us to face the great challenge and to have a better future. In fact, we are talking too much about irrigation and we forget the role of agricultural drainage. I wonder how we could manage our, to have healthy soil, how to control water logging, salinity, and so on. How we could control malaria, how we could control, as I mentioned, water logging and so on. In fact, agricultural drainage system, you can see, based on our experience in Egypt and other countries, it is one of the important key to achieve sustainability. And I fully recommend it to consider to invest in agricultural drainage system, not for agriculture, but also for urban and rural. It is a good system to control even under extreme event, rainfall and so on. This is in short, and from ourselves as ICID, and we are ready to support and to give any technical support for you in this direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You will come here. I'm sure our panelists are capturing those points. What we'll then do is we'll go around and you answer the question that pertains to you as you are capturing it now. Over to you, sir.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And name is Simbasbanda with Fanapan. Just quick comments on my colleague Tembi on the Malabo commitments and performance of countries. We've seen countries actually regressing from Biennial Review 1. And there's one who participated in asking the question, why were countries not performing well? One of the key issues is about data. Countries are not actually collecting data on what they are doing. It's not so much that they are not doing anything. So this whole area of data management, I saw South Africa had an M&E framework as a major recommendation. Without data, that doesn't work. So that's one thing to keep note of. Also on the colleague who presented one of the issues on National Food and Nutrition Security Survey, I saw some numbers there which I thought were interesting. 500 square meters, 1,000. I don't know to what extent this is taking account of informal settlement communities who I know actually don't have that kind of land that we saw on there. And lastly, a lot of the countries are investing in CSA, which largely focusing on adaptation issues. We hardly hear much, even in this meeting, about mitigation. And given the core benefits between adaptation and mitigation, we want to try and see if we can capture the narrative of our contribution to mitigation and NDCs via adaptation measures. So that's something just to think about in terms of where we are putting our money. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please pass on to the lady there. Maybe what we'll just do, because we are running out of time for sure, we have the other three here. Then we just do those, and then we do a final answer and wrap up. Okay.
Thank you to all speakers. That was a great session. My question is for Engineer Chisumko. Can you give us some information maybe on the land tenure arrangements that you're planning for the new schemes? Also, with new schemes, are there plans and arrangements to apportion plots for women and young farmers? And also with new schemes, are there plans or ideas to have learning spaces as part of those plots? For example, the local schools to have a plot, and also for agronomic experimentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's get the next one. I think it would be a good idea for sure to say whom the person is directed to, if you can.
Mary Jane from ARC. It was very interesting session. I was worried. I was going home and I thought this wasn't successful, but today I'm happy. I just want to say, for the South African presenters, we are talking about mitigation, and you were talking about your studies of how the households are participating. I think mitigation would be leapfrog technology, and I will mention one of my babies that I love so much is aquaponics. And one of what you presented, say, was that there was that divorce between agriculture and fishery. And aquaponics, for example, it's a baby that has nowhere to belong because it's agriculture and fishery, but now the divorce, the aquaponics society is fighting that it's even put into education where kids can be taught. In aquaponics, where fish waste is used, integration for plants, it's something that can be even used for education, but also for those households that have no space. So I would like, we don't have time, but I think we need to think about leapfrog technologies, and that is one of them, especially in those 500 square meters, like Prof. Sim was saying also, where in the informal settlement, we don't need too much space. We can start a small aquaponic system. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's have the next one.
Thank you. I'm Kat Kira from Cameroon. My question is directed to Engineer Bezel. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was so beautiful, and I was wishing I was from Zimbabwe. So, considering the fact that Cameroon has a very long way to go with respect to irrigation, and drawing from the inspiration of Ghana, they had an initiative, 2020, 2021, with the government trying to do a program called the One Village, One Dam, and it has not been successful. From your presentation, you mentioned something very similar. I don't know, has it been successful? That's the first thing. And secondly, what are the strategies that you're making sure that this kind of project, which is being implemented by the government, is successful, so that countries like mine can be able to, look up to success stories like yours? Thank you.
Thank you very much. The last one on that line. And then we have 2 questions online. I think they are a bit worried that we are forgetting them as well. So we'll have assistance after you. Thanks.
My name is Temba. I have one question from the first speaker. In terms, when we're looking at women, the statistics have shown that we have more women than men in Africa. So without women participation in agriculture in Africa, growth cannot be achieved, because women raise kids, they grow food in villages in different parts of Africa. So what is this convention doing in these countries to make them understand the importance of increasing those numbers? Because when I look at it, it's very alarming, because even in my own country, it's very alarming, the participation in terms of women, although they're trying to push it, but it's something I think as Africa, we should be able to push through for them to have a meaningful contribution in agriculture, which is one. The second one is looking at sustainability of demand. The reason why you find a lot of these technologies mitigate climate change is because we need to produce food as efficiently as possible. One of the key things here that we need to look at, we need to look at the population growth. For the second speaker, in Zimbabwe, estimation population growth is around 16 million. In South Africa, it's about 60 million plus. But if you look at the production that we, as a country of 16 million plus people, are putting on our system. The pressure is so high. You guys are lucky now at the current point of population growth. So what you need to also look at is agroecosystems, how you integrate that both with irrigation and agroecosystem, and managing the farmland that you do have. Because as you grow your population, you will find that the pressures will become so intense. That's why it comes down to infrastructure breakdown and all those things that happen because of the pressures that are put on the system. The last one is the colleague from the human research. I think the research that you did is very interesting, but I wish the research can be implemented more in terms of looking into what I was saying to her, in terms of women engagement, in schools engagement, and community engagement more. Because the problem, the policies that these policies that we're trying to talk, they are talking about solving the real people problems that are happening in the communities that we live in every day. Because as the communities grow and we need more food, those are the challenges that we face. So community involvement and participation is key to implement these policies. As our colleagues have said, that implementation is problematic, but it's not. As long as we can involve all of these communities and schools and involve them and educate them and enlighten them with all of these nice policies that we sing every day, I think it would make it different.
Thank you very much for the question. I'm sure the colleagues have taken note. So we have questions online. I'll read one here from Jay-Z. Cognizant of the global climate action, focusing on adaptation and mitigation actions, and having embraced climate-smart agriculture in its 3 pillars, how have we attempted to make our implementation inclusive, as it appears that the mitigation aspect is not as balanced or articulated as the other 2? I think you have taken note. Have you taken note of the question? I'm not sure who is this directed to. Do all households need land to be food secure? Do all households need land to be food secure? I think this has been taken note of. These are the 2 questions we have online. So colleagues, dear panelists, you have done a brilliant job with provoking the people. So they are coming back with, I'm sure they're not difficult, right? They are insightful questions.
Very insightful questions. And probably for me, a lot of the questions I am taking also as comments and challenges for sort of new areas of development. So for instance, the first question on to what extent do we translate policies to the household level? I think all policies, be it at regional or national level, they're ultimately supposed to sort of benefit people at household level. So there's probably a need for FANAPAN and the HSRC, because the HSRC touches the household level, to sort of have a look at, is that happening? Because what I know is the challenge often with regional policies is often the sort of domestication at national level. And there is a need when, I think Beatrice really spoke well to say that the presidents, they sign, but now it's up to the technical people to make those sort of continental agreements be applicable at national level. And there's often an issue of competition with sort of national priorities and whether there's alignment and that sort of thing. And as FANAPAN, part of what we do is to work with the member countries to help with that sort of domestication and alignment. We've done it with our seed work, where we have domesticated the SADC regional seed security framework. And so I think there's really a need for that to happen across board, so that, you know, countries, they're looking at SDG targets, they're looking at Malabo targets, they're looking at all sorts of targets. How do we make sure that all those align. I think there's probably a lot of work that needs to happen in that area. Then in terms of packaging success stories, I think that's something that we are taking. We do have policy briefs that we will share with the African Union, but we will also be packaging key messages from this conference as well. And I think another key important thing is the issue of facilitating knowledge exchange. Part of why we have a regional policy dialogue as exchange to just staying at a national level is that we know that there is so much for countries to learn from each other. That's why we bring them together, to be able to facilitate that knowledge sharing. And we've got partners like CADESA that also help with that sort of knowledge dissemination. Then in terms of women in agriculture, yes, I agree, it is a challenge. It is worrying. But I will also want to maybe reflect a little bit to say, even looking at this room, I was speaking to a colleague of mine the other day, just yesterday. So she was saying, there are not that many women. I was like, we did try. We did try to get the women. We sent invitations to women. But when they then send them up for approval, with their superiors, then we get a different name. And you can't go around some of these things. I think what we need to do is perhaps work hand in hand with organizations like UN Women, CARE, that push for inclusion of women. Maybe our voices, if we come together, will be louder. But definitely there is need for equal participation in decision making from household level all the way up to platforms like this. And that is not going to happen overnight. It's something that we need to keep going. Then lastly, on the issue of implementation of policies, I would like to echo my colleague who said the other day that, policies on their statements of intent, unless you put money to them, then they become real and become implementable. So I'm glad that the session that follows after this is going to be looking at investment and how can we get that right. I think that's my comment for now.
Thank you very much. I'm sure they're happy with your response. Thank you for taking that. Over to you, Doc.
Great appreciation to those who demonstrated that they were listening to me by now, posing some questions to clarify what I've said. I will start with a comment on data and the size of the household regarding the informal settlements. Sir, you are 100% correct. We need data in nowadays. Because if we don't have data as the continent, I'll put it broadly like that, we will not be able to predict what effects climate change is going to have in the continent, especially at a household level. Fortunately, in the survey that I spoke, I'm referring to, we managed to amass a lot of data using the technology which I think can be replicated across the continent. We basically use RedCap, Research Electronic Data Capturing, where our data collectors will go to household with the tablets loaded with all the questionnaires, and then they start to engage with the household representatives. Immediately when they finish, they will punch enter, and data will go straight to the central server. And in the central server, there was a data manager who was sitting on real time, monitoring all the data that was streaming in such a way that if they pick up any mistake, then they call the leader in that team. So we have those capabilities where we can deploy the very same technology, let me say, in DRC, I'm making an example. The data collectors are in the field, they are moving from door to door, and then when they press enter, data can be reflected in a particular central point, which we agreed on. And over there is a team of data analysts who are monitoring data on real time. This survey, which in actual fact came through the request of SADC, that South Africa must develop this methodology, which we have implemented. I hope then that through the diplomatic engagement between South Africa and its counterparts, these technologies and the methodology that we have developed can be made available. I don't have an authority to comment on that and to say anything. Coming to the size of the household, certainly within the informal settlements, we can say that there is no land. Because the reason why he's saying it's informal because everybody is just grabbing whatever piece of land that is there. So the production of food is being sacrificed through the prioritization of settlement. Hence, those areas, the informal settlement, are the ones that are highly vulnerable to food insecurity and are the ones that don't have money to go and buy food. Something needs to be done on that aspect as a way of intervention through technological development to cater for such highly vulnerable households. The second comment came from Agricultural Research Council. Certainly, ma'am, one of the things that were emphasized by the department, DALRAD, is that please go there, help us to understand the situation so that we can have impactful intervention. So technologies that we are mentioning, if again, in the region and in the continent, all the institutions that are capable to develop technologies can come together and look at what is emerging from the household to regional and so on, I'm very certain that the continent will have its own unique technologies as an intervention measures to deal with the issue of food security. So it's very important. I hope again, as the resolutions of this gathering, is that the institutions in the continent, in the regions, must come together, because if we are unable to develop our own technologies, the one that you get from elsewhere, you pay the royalties and it becomes useless. Let's develop our own technologies as an intervention measure. I'm looking forward that after we have submitted the results of this study to DALRAD then will be able to bring the like-minded and said, there is a problem. What do we do? Can we intervene with agroponic? Can we intervene with a number of things that can be done as a technological intervention? The issue of women, certainly one of the things when we were analyzing and categorizing data, we were emphasizing the differences in terms of participation in food security between women and men. We were looking at whether the household is man-headed or the household is female-headed. If it's a female-headed, what kind of characteristics that pop up as a way of showing us if, for instance, maybe a household that is being headed by a woman is more vulnerable to food insecurity than a household that is headed by a female. We look at that, we have that data. What was the last question? I think I've exhausted all of them. Thank you very much.
The other ones, if there are other ones, we still have tea break, right?
It came from line that.
All right.
Does all household needs to have a land? Of course, land is the primary contributor for each and every person to be able to produce his or her own food. Otherwise, if you don't have land, you will then rely on food which you buy from the supermarkets or elsewhere. Then that exposes you to the fluctuations of the prices and you have no control. But the bottom line is that produce something which you can use as a way of cushioning yourself from food insecurity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we are going to make it quicker now. I think I've really overshot my time by 30 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I'll try to attend to the questions as raised by colleagues. With respect to land tenure, if I pick it well, it's with reference to the model which we are promoting, whereby we have put in a new layer of management on top of the IMCs. This model is being implemented with full cooperation from the farmers, whereby farmers are actually advised of the implications of their participation as a way of cooperating with government and the benefits for them to participate in the model, whereby we are saying the farm manager helps the farmers to make decisions on the crops to grow and links the farmers with the markets and links the farmers also with the financing institutions for financing, and also government comes in with support with the mechanization so that the farmers form a board of directors in a cooperative company where they share a dividend at the end of the growing season. and they can also offer their services in terms of labor during the production, cycle. So it's mostly affecting the bigger irrigation schemes. So the smaller irrigation schemes, we still have, IMCs, of course, with a layer of the business development managers on top of them, but they are still having a kind of active, participation in the infield, practices. And the issue of demo plots is still there and being promoted in terms of extension messaging. The demo plots are still part of the, the architecture. And then over and above that, this is in line with what we have developed as a policy instrument, the control of irrigable areas regulations, which are meant to ensure that where there is irrigation, where there is access to prime land, farmers are then supposed to produce in return to the privilege that they have. Because we have defined irrigable areas as a privilege, because not every citizen has access to irrigable area. Therefore, those that are privileged to have access to irrigable area must then contribute to the national, discourse by being productive. Because we are seeing evidence of idle, infrastructure, idle farms, and so forth. So the stretch instrument is meant to promote, full utilization of the land. And then with respect to the village dam and so forth, the comment that was made by a colleague from Cameroon, the Bo per village, program is, we have done some piloting. I think so far we have done about 435, projects that have been already, implemented and installed. We haven't yet taken time to evaluate in terms of what would overall regard as the success rate. But so far, with the nutrition gardens that have been set up and the fish ponds that have been set up, it's still, quite positive, even the excitement that is coming from the farmers, though they haven't started to benefit from the fisheries, but they are already benefiting from the nutrition gardens and the potable water that they are having access to. So I think to a greater extent in the preliminary, evaluation, we are quite confident that it's a step in the right direction in terms of, investment. And this is actually supported by the reality that the capacity to drill and install is within government. So it means it's infrastructure that is coming at the bare minimum cost, which adds to the sustainability aspect of, the infrastructure. Thank you.
Sure. Last but not least.
Thanks, Chairperson, and thanks for colleagues for the comments. I'm sure I don't have a question, but there were comments. They were very good. I really support the AU view. Where we are in South Africa, I know we've got UN agencies and Pan as well. They really support us to make sure that we strengthen our policy. As colleague has said, sometimes the challenge becomes the funding to make sure that they are implemented. But we are really making sure that we are driving it from our side. Funding from internationally, I know there is a lot of funding. The document that you have developed, I'm sure there are 3 or 4 agencies that currently have source funding and using our policy document to implement and assist. We had I was part of the team that was also implementing a project more on UN women. They were funding it. We gathered women, and then we got FAO and ARC to try to make sure that we implement some of the policies, and those were funded internationally. So documents, policies like this, if they are not really used by governments alone, but also the agencies and any other who want to tap on it and use it and make sure they scale it up for to be benefit by all. The issue of mitigation, I know, is also covered as the CSA is highlighting adaptation and mitigation, as well as when we are looking at food security. Colleagues are currently now in Kenya discussing the negotiations, but adaptation here in Africa is really focus that we need to deal with it. But mitigation as well, we are also addressing it. I know in a document they have drafted, we've got it there. There are projects already here, we are running it within from the climate smart agriculture that are also dealing with mitigation. So adaptation is the way, but mitigation is still the things that we need to be doing. The issue of hydroponics, aquaponics, yes, I agree with you that the divorce might, but as you are ARC, we need to maybe make sure that you are fully part of, to make sure that the colleagues that from there, wherever they are, farmers, they are benefiting, and we can also be part of it in broadly. Thanks, Chairperson.
Thank you very much for those answers. I'm sure we are all covered in terms of our remarks, in terms of our comments. Let's give these colleagues a resounding applause for a very exciting session. The reason why we exceeded time is because they did a good job. I think they triggered a lot of interesting issues that I think for the rest of the day, as we go for tea, as we go for the excursion, we will continue talking about these issues. So thank you so much for even allowing me to chair this session. I think I also thoroughly enjoyed it. A hand of applause to me as well, really? Yes, thank you so much. We meet in the next phases. Let me give this over to Tembi to give us the logistics moving forward. Thanks.
Thank you. I think I'm supposed to be facilitating the next session. I am only going to allow you a 10-minute break, just to stretch your legs and quickly drink something, please. It's because we have to be on time for the last session. So I really ask that if we can just 10 minutes, please. If you can avoid chit-chatting and just go straight for your tea and come back, we would really appreciate. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, if we can take our seats. You know that we only have two people here. We only have these two, keynote and I'm told they're not there. Okay, thank you very much. We've made some slight changes to this session. I've been asked to take over the facilitation of this session and the closing ceremony. So we're going to just combine, so if we can just have all the speakers up here if possible. I hope there's enough chairs. Otherwise, let me just introduce myself. My name is Sub-Saharan. I'm with FANAPAN. I am responsible for the Nutrition Sensitive Agriculture Program. Sad to say, I haven't had much nutrition being mentioned. Yes, I've had food security, but climate smart agriculture without delivering on nutrition outcomes is probably not too smart. That's all I'll say. So if we can just keep that in mind. So we've lost 30 minutes. We're trying to recover. As it has turned out, for session 10, we have two speakers, which somehow will save us some time. So I'll not be giving you more time because you only have two, because we've lost 10 minutes. 30 minutes already. So I'm hoping that we can fit the two speakers in the 30 minutes so that we're back on schedule and we can do the closing ceremony on time. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Anton L. to give us the keynote presentation, and that will be followed by Dr. Neil, who is going to, to be our single panelist on this. I'm quite excited about this session. At least the title says investment priorities. I've had a lot of people talk about implementation, the fact that governments were not short of policies in Africa, but the implementation is an issue. And of course, investment is a key part of that implementation. Without investment, especially smart public investment, leveraging, private sector leveraging on smart public investment, you're not going to get any policies being implemented. And for me, policies are nothing short of the government's instrument for public investment. So if government says we have a policy, but they're not putting any money into it, then they don't have a policy. So I hope that our presenters will be able to meet that requirement. So please, let's go ahead and listen to Mr. L, who is the Director of African Regional Center, Stockholm International Water Institute. Please.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. Very good to be here, thank you. My name is Anton Earl. I'm Director of Stockholm International Water Institute's Africa Regional Center, which is an office based right here in Pretoria that operates across the African continent. CIWI is a policy institute that works for improved water governance for a just, sustainable, and prosperous future. And I sometimes get the question as to why would a water policy institute be interested in farming? And the reason is rather simple. In Africa, you've got roughly 180 million small-scale farmers, smallholder farmers that are distributed across the continent. And we view them as the frontline water managers of Africa. And what these water managers do on their small plots of land is cumulatively really important in terms of water resources management. You can reduce soil erosion, sedimentation, improve percolation of groundwater. So that's why a policy institute is interested in what they are doing. Now, I'm here to speak about rain-fed agriculture. But that doesn't mean that we are against irrigation. Irrigation is a very important part of development in Africa, and CIWI has certainly played a role in improving governance arrangements and the finance and bankability of irrigation projects on the continent and will continue to do so. But what I am against is the term subsistence agriculture, because I have to date not met a farmer that wants to be a subsistence farmer. I've met many, many farmers that do struggle to make ends meet, that do struggle to certainly make sure that they can respond to a changing climate and still produce enough food for their families. But when they do manage to do that, they are also very eager to move far away from subsistence levels and to be able to engage in the market, to be able to sell the excess produce that they hope to produce and send their kids to school, to buy clothing for those children when they do go to school. So I don't like subsistence agriculture, and that's why I'm here to speak about ways that we can attract finance into the rain-fed smallholder agriculture sector, which by and large I find is neglected. Next slide, please. So I'll speak a little bit about some of the challenges that we face with attracting finance into the rain-fed sector. And I will also speak a little bit about some of the emergent approaches to address this challenge. And I'll end with an invitation, not an invitation to lunch, unfortunately, but an invitation to do with food, nonetheless. So just to get us right back to the basics, the Swedish professors Falkenmark and Rockström in 2006 came to this terminology that they called green water. And it's not water that's colored green, of course, but it's the soil moisture that they, of course, understood was the only way that plants do grow. But all of you know that. You're from an agriculture background. But I have to remind my colleagues working in the world of water management that it's the moisture at root zone which causes plants to grow, and not all the water that you see in lakes and rivers and pumps and pipes. We have to get water to the root zone. And the availability of soil moisture in the policy debates, where they talk about future projected impacts of climate change. Farmers speak about the present tense. They will say the climate has changed. We can no longer farm in the same way as my parents farmed, my grandparents used to farm. The rains come later. They last for a shorter period of time. They are more intense when they do arrive. So it's almost like a speeding up of the hydrological cycle, cycles of drought and flood. We heard about Cyclone Freddy and the havoc that this is causing in Malawi, Mozambique, parts of Zimbabwe as we speak. And that's somehow become the norm. So communities that talk about we are getting a lot of water, but it's arriving at the wrong time, a different time to what we are used to. And their systems for farming are not necessarily adapted to this new reality. And that's where we can change things. I talk about a slow water movement in much the way as we speak about slow food. Well, we need to slow down the progress of water through the hydrological cycle. And the only part of the hydrological cycle we can control is from when a drop of water lands on the soil to where it passes back into the ocean. That's the only part of the journey we can control. I know people will speak about cloud seeding and all sorts of things out there, but realistically speaking, we can only control the portion of the hydrological cycle that is on land. But that's a lot. That means there's a lot that we can do. We can make sure that that water that does land on the soil stays there longer, infiltrates deeper into the groundwater, doesn't rush off with precious nutrients and topsoil into the surface water bodies. And that's what we aim to do, and to attract finance so that we can do that at scale. Next slide, please. I'll jump through a few of the statistics, but it's interesting to note when we look at food production, and I'm talking about staple food production in Africa, estimates are that 95% of staple food production on the continent still comes from rain-fed agriculture sources. Yes, there's a lot of supplementary irrigation over there and a lot of other types of supplements that come in there. But that it's still largely responsible for producing the staple food products that are consumed. And yet, the estimates show that 95% of public expenditure in Africa on agriculture goes to the large-scale irrigation sector. And again, I state, I'm not against that. We do need large investments in the irrigated sector, and we need to ramp up those investments massively. But there is something wrong here in this equation, where 95% of our food, staple food, comes from one system and is only attracting 5% of the public money. Next slide, please. So the business case for investing in rain-fed agriculture, and as I say, rain-fed can also include a range of locally derived water sources, rainwater harvesting, for instance, and using that on the field, shallow groundwater, sand dams, working with recession agriculture. There's different ways to do this, but they all do have in common that they need some investment in materials, sometimes investment in capacity building and training. You know, it's interesting, a few months ago, myself and a few of my Siwi colleagues were in Malawi, where we were near Mount Mulanje, the beautiful mountain, and visiting some rural communities. And they were showing us how they were applying a system over there, and you can see a photo of the system that they use, where a local NGO is helping them to harvest the water that does fall, the rainwater that does fall, and make sure it infiltrates more into the soil. And when I asked the village chief what she would ask for if she could get the attention of world leaders, of her own government leaders, what help would she ask for? And she said 3 things. She said, well, it's really hard work digging these trenches. We'd really benefit from some better equipment, hoes, pickaxes, shovels, maybe a wheelbarrow. Second thing what she said was better inputs. If we had advanced seed varieties, better fertilizers, we could also increase our yield, but we don't have access to that. And the third thing we'd like is that in the instance where everything comes together and we do produce an excess, we would like to be able to get that excess of our crops to the market. And I stood there listening to that and I thought, well, those are rather modest requests. Okay, maybe building a road is bigger, of course, but the first 2 things around some agricultural equipment, pickaxes and hoes and wheelbarrows, and some better seed varieties. We're not talking about a lot of money here, and yet it's difficult for them to access that. So the business case that we are working on developing, along with partners such as the Zambezi Watercourse Commission, with ICRAF, and various partners, is looking at the return on investment for improving rain-fed agriculture, first and foremost for the farmer. So increased yield, of course, that's the prime interest that a farmer certainly has. And of course, the reducing that risk of moisture variability at root zone, especially now with the changing climate. Recognizing, of course, that you do have higher labor costs associated with a lot of the improved rain-fed agriculture approaches and some of the construction materials. So you say for every $1 that you invest in doing that, what is the return are you getting in relation to those costs? But then going beyond the return on investment for the farmer, you look at the return on investment for the environment and society as a whole. So that some of those things I spoke about earlier, reducing soil erosion, lower sedimentation of water courses, increased infiltration of groundwater, etc. So those sort of benefits. But you go beyond that, of course. Someone spoke this morning about climate change mitigation, and this is one of those fortunate examples where you can invest in climate change adaptation as well as mitigation. Brilliant. Not many of those around, are there? So carbon soil sequestration. There's a huge, huge potential over there of attracting finance both to the farmers as well as to the organizations, the extension worker organizations that are working with those farmers. And we also heard yesterday about saying, well, there's been a decline in government extension services across the continent, an unfortunate decline. But on the flip side of that coin, we've also seen NGOs stepping into the breach and doing excellent work, local NGOs, staffed by local staff and doing local work. But interestingly, we're also in contact with the private sector operators in the agricultural value chain that actually provide extension services to farmers because they can see the long-term yield for them, the long-term results for them in their business. So that becomes interesting. So if you can access carbon credits to help fund some of that agricultural extension work, you're coming up with a sustainable business model in the end. And then, of course, recognizing that you bring about social benefits, job creation. We spoke about subsistence farming, that term that I don't enjoy. And it's interesting when you speak to little kids and you ask them, what do you want to be one day? Well, it's astronaut, fireman, teacher maybe. None of them stick up their arms saying, I want to be a subsistence farmer or even a farmer, because farming isn't seen as being a viable career prospect for many young people in Africa. And they make the sensible decision, they migrate to the city in hope of a better life. But what if we could flip that around and say, there is actually a viable future for you in farming? Next slide, please. I think I've used up a bit of my time. So just to point out again this concept of the nested benefits and impacts of investing in your rain-fed smallholder agriculture at massive levels of scale. Management, I speak about just on farm level. This is what the farmers do, those 180 million water managers across the continent. And it doesn't matter if we call it conservation agriculture, climate smart agriculture, low tillage, organic agriculture, but they all have certain principles in common. Next slide. So we, along with the partners that I mentioned, such as Zamcom, have been working on raising awareness, raising knowledge on the benefits of investing in rain-fed agriculture, showing how this can be done, and eventually we would like to change policy, both at the level of the African continent, so we're working through Zamcom, our prime government partner, but also internationally. When we speak to the DFIs, the development finance institutions, are there models that can be developed where they can actually start moving away from grants into rain-fed agriculture, which are small, into a much bigger loan market? Are there guarantees that they could be stepping up with? So we've produced a few knowledge products looking at unlocking the potential of rain-fed agriculture, mapping the financial mechanisms available. So there we do identify climate change credits, for instance, payment for ecosystem services, for instance, different approaches you could be using to bring money into that sector. The concept of virtual jobs we look at. Every time you import a bag of wheat from America or Europe or wherever else it might be, you're actually exporting a potential job opportunity from Africa, well, which no one wants to do, of course. So there's a job creation imperative over here that goes with that. So if you get a chance, take a look at some of those. Next slide. Just briefly, the initiative that we are working on, we told our grant financiers who have investing around $2 million over a 5-year period, we are confident of raising $10 million into the rain-fed sector in the Zambezi countries. So these are 8 countries that share the Zambezi. And we are working across all 8 countries, and we have got learning cases with local partners in Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Malawi to try and see if we can, at scale, develop some of these mechanisms, such as carbon finance, such as the payment for ecosystem services approach, where we are working with an NGO in northern Malawi, accessing 20,000 farmers to get them into catchment conservation, watershed conservation, and the local water utility has said that they are willing to invest in the operation and maintenance costs of that PES scheme. So really exciting things that are happening. Working with the private sector as well, trying to look at ways of supporting this sector in the long term. So all of that will feed into our business case, which we will use to advocate over the coming years at continental scale for increased investments here. And that's what we are really working on at the moment. Next slide. We have a great need for partnerships, and we have several partners that are already joining us on this journey, but we call for more and different roles. We need the governments and the policymakers to commit to this, to commit to pushing harder to make sure that we do make sure that investments and support is given to this sector. I've mentioned the development finance institutions and the private sector. So right across the agricultural value chain, we can't just look at production. We need agricultural companies that operate on the input side and the output side to say that this is a sector that they see as viable. And most of them do. When we speak to most of them, they are very keen to work with the smallholder farmers. But for them, the challenge is always, how do you get up to scale? And that's where we need to get some innovation to make sure that this sector is scaled up. Working directly with farmers and the organizations that represent them, and several of them that we are in dialogue. Finding community advocates to take this further. And then markets and connectivity experts, people that work in the realm of attracting finance into the sector. So people that try to matchmake good ideas and good potentials, sometimes based around a challenge, and those that are sitting with money and are looking for a rate of return. Those sort of people tell us that globally there is no shortage of money. There's a lot of capital out there looking for a rate of return. So it's trying to form a bridge between that, between the needs on the ground and that potential funding out there. That's where the challenge lies. Next slide, please. I'll raise awareness of an event we are planning in Botswana in July this year, Rain-Fed Agriculture Finance and Investment Forum, hosted by the government of Botswana and convened by ZAMCOM, our government partners, where we hope to bring together some of these partners that I've just mentioned that can actually commit to some of the business models coming out for rain-fed agriculture and see if we can form some of these links, matchmake some of the challenges and opportunities out there. So if you are interested, please contact us. We'll make sure you get the information about this event. Next slide, please. And I introduce our program manager, Kasonde Mulenga, who's here today. In fact, he came through. If you need more information about Tiara and what we are trying to do and transform investments into the sector, please don't hesitate to contact him or myself if you want to know more. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. L. Thank you for that. For me, just the one, take-home point, the business case. That's really the bottom line. And I think we could say the same about irrigated agriculture. What's the business case? It's actually a question I wanted to pose even the last 2 days. I kept thinking, we're hearing all these suggestions on solutions, whether it's capacity development or it could be some technology. But at the back of my mind, always I was thinking, what's the business case? Because without a business case, it's not going to be sustainable. So that's something to think about. So we will move on. I'm sure you'll have some questions. Let's move on and listen to Dr. Neil Lazaro, who is the research program manager at the water program with the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research to be a respondent to this discussion here. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Not sure how much time you were asked to.
20 minutes, right?
Well, you have 5. So if you feel the urge to say more, resist it.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. You've already heard from me once this week, so I'll do my best to keep it short and sharp. So the focus of this session, I know we've been upgraded to the first-class seats, Anton and I, but it's really been thinking about the investment priorities. And next slide, please. I just wanted to remind you of ACR's priorities across our 10-year strategy. So thinking about food security, managing natural resources with a keen eye to climate change, nutrition-sensitive agriculture, really important, focusing on gender empowerment, the role of women and girls, value chains, supply chains, and of course building that research for development, science and policy baseline to support informed decision making. And I'm so excited that each and every one of these has been addressed in depth by really knowledgeable experts in this room over the past couple of days. Next slide, please. So, thankfully, well, not thankfully, but I'm still suffering a little bit from jet lag. So I was up quite early this morning trying to go through my notes from the past couple of days, and I created a couple of word clouds there, just with words and ideas that had sort of come to me as I sat through all of the presentations over the last couple of days. And it's very clear, as I said in my opening remarks, it's not good enough to have good intentions and good ideas. You need local partners to help shape those out. And it strikes me that, in terms of the what, all of the speakers over the course of this week were really, really clear, all right? You don't need Australia or anyone else telling you, what the problem is and what the questions are. I think you've nailed them. They're really, really, really clear. Sure, we didn't hear about all of them in as much detail as I would have hoped, but there's no shortage of good ideas for investments. What we heard not quite enough about, but a lot of people, and especially on the sidelines, talking about the how. And I just want to emphasize this point. No matter what your ambition is and no matter what your goal is, if you foster an environment of trust, it will help to grow that idea, that project. And if you don't have that environment of trust, no matter what your partnership looks like, no matter what your ambitions are, you'll be unsuccessful. And so we heard a little bit over the last few days about trust. We heard about partnerships. In fact, I'm going away. I need an organization to help me understand the multiplicity of organizations that are in fact active in this